So this video assumes that you've completed apps 1 and 2 and might want to refactor them in order to improve your mark, because you may have unnecessary code duplication and some of your methods might be too long. So just to show you, I've modified the program. I have a BMI calculator as well as a distance converter in this static class, and here I am outputting a heading, which is a duplication, showing choices, which is a duplication, and getting the user's choice, all of which have been done before. If I just show you how it runs, so if I choose app 2, the BMI converter, again I get another heading here, another list of choices. I'm going to choose Imperial. I can now put my measurements in and get my BMI index of 21.56 and my message to the BAME groups. But what the code I've got would fall foul of some of the methods are too long. I might lose 8 points due to long methods, and I might lose a further 8 points due to there's lots more code duplication in there, which would reduce the quality measurement by 53%. And the code quality measurement is about 40% of the total for each of the apps. And each of the apps does require an output heading. Each of the apps does input numbers. So there's a number of methods which can be factored out into a general purpose library class. So what I'm going to do now is create this new class, which I'm going to call ConsoleHelpers instead of userlib. And it's going to have a general purpose output heading, which is past the title, because that's the only thing that's going to change. I'm also going to have a general purpose get users choices, but let's start with the output heading. So as this is a library class and I want it accessible by all the apps, I'm going to put it at the top level. Now it is possible to put it in a separate library class project, but I think as we only need the one library class, I will do it the simple way first. So we're going to add a new class, and I'm going to call this class ConsoleHelper. Class name should be singular. There's a similar class called HTML helper in ASP.NET. That's where I got the idea from. So it's going to be a ConsoleHelper class. Okay, so by default it doesn't say whether it's private or public, but a private class is no use to us. So this class is going to be a public class. Notice that you've got some usings there which haven't been used yet because they're underlined in green. I won't remove them yet because we certainly need the system library. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is make it a static class. So we don't have to create an object from it in order to be able to use it. We can use the class directly. And now let's think about the methods we want. They'll all be public, otherwise we can't access them. They'll all be static. We're going to have an output heading method. Now in fact we've already got that method in our distance converter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove it from the distance converter and put it into the ConsoleHelper in place of that. Okay, and it was private in the distance converter, but we need it now to be public. And we don't want a fixed title. At the moment it's fixed, it's the distance converter heading, and we want it to be more general than that, so we'll add a parameter as a title, and here instead of this title we'll have the title using this string interpolation method. Not quite sure why it's not happy. Why is it not happy? Oh yes, it's not happy. Forgotten. Okay, there's a good example of the compiler being very helpful. If I read the message, output heading cannot declare instant members in a static class. I told you everything was static, didn't I? So we want a public static method. Okay, that's happy now. So if we build that, we should have build problems, and we can go straight to them by double-clicking on the errors. Not worried about the unnecessary usings. We can go straight to here. This is where we're in the distance converter, and it can't use its output heading now because we've moved it to the console helper. So what we're going to do now is, the title was distance converter, so it needs a title, but it can't access it. It says it doesn't exist. Now hopefully it should find it for us, and it doesn't. Okay, well, what we want is we want to use the console helper. What I've forgotten to do is to put the name of the class first, so it has to be console helper dot, and then there's the output heading. So you notice your class name goes in the same color as this static class here. So we're now using the console helper class, and it now builds, and we're happy. And there'll be a similar one in the BMI class. If I scroll down this, I think it's right at the bottom, you can see it's got a similar method of output heading here, which we don't need anymore, so that can come out. What we need is, this is the title, so I'm going to copy that first and cut this method out, delete this method, sorry, not cut, delete, because I've still got something copied I want. Go back and find where it won't build anymore, which is there, and we can paste that title back in. Okay, using the console helper instead of the general purpose output heading, instead of a specific output heading. We have halved the code there. We have reduced the code count and made it easier to maintain, because there's only one output heading method to maintain now, and it's in the console helper. And finally, if I go to the program class, here's another example where we have an output heading, not a separate method. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to my console helper, my output heading method, and paste in the title, semicolon. So we've taken 5 lines of code out to be replaced with 1 line of code. So we've definitely reduced all these applications and made them easier to maintain. We're now going to do the next refactoring, which is to introduce into our console helper a SelectChoice method, which is passed a list of choices and returns the index value of the selected choice. So it has a return value, and we can use it for our selection of which app to run, as well as our selection between the distance units, and it can be used in the BMI calculator as well. So there's going to be 2 parts to this select choice. First of all, we have to display all the choices, and then we have to ask the user for their choice. So I put a local variable in called choice number and set it to 0, and now we use our first example of the for loop, easiest one to use is the for each loop, because we have our choices as strings. We want to access them one by one. We can just say choice in choices, and that will take each choice in turn from the list of the array of choices. Okay, now we want the user to choose them by number, so what we're going to do first of all is increment choice number. So for the first choice it will be 1. I know the index value is 0, but that'll confuse users, so we'll start the choice numbers at 1 and we'll just write them out. So we'll put the choice number first, then a dot, and some spaces, and then the choice. That's all we need. Okay, it's not easy to test it at this point. Okay, let's test it then by using the program class as an example, where here's where we were writing out a list of 2 choices here. So instead we're going to use the ConsoleHelper, and we're going to use the SelectChoice method, and in the brackets we need an array of choices. So what I've done is create a string array of choices using initializing them to the distance converter and the BMI calculator. There's our 2 choices. I've then called the ConsoleHelper and the SelectChoice method, passing those choices. Let's just see if that works. Yes, it hasn't gone too badly. We need a blank line, so we've got our 2 choices displayed, but we need the next stage now. The second part of selecting the choice, having displayed all the choices, is to get the user's input and return it. Okay, so we'll do that. We'll make it a write, so the cursor stays on the same line. Then we have to get the value as a string, and then we have to convert it to an int. We've already got choice number. Okay, so there we are. And that should finish the selecting the choice now. Go back to the program. We don't need these lines now, because the ConsoleHelper select choice returns an int. So we can say that. We can get that int from the select choice. And then we can use it. It is a number now, so we don't need the quotation marks. Okay, and then we can test it. So I put my choice 2 in again. I'm now in the BMI calculator. So that works. However, you'd fall foul of a quality issue here. The key is there that we've actually got comments in single line comments. That suggests to me there's 2 parts to this. The first part is displaying all the choices. So I think that could be refactored. We can go and use quick actions and refactorings. Extract as a method. Okay, the method is going to be called display choices. Okay, so it separated it out into display choices. I don't know why it's not gone quite right. We don't need to return a choice number because we're already displaying them at this point. So that can be avoided. Refactoring worked so much easier in the old version. I don't know what they've done to this new version. So we just need to display the choices and then get the choice number. Okay, so that's now a shorter method. It only does one thing, displays the choices and gets the answer. The displayed choices are now separated. Of course needs a comment. I'm not concerned about the parameters. We'll just stick to a summary comment, is fine. You should now be looking at these 3 lines of code and thinking to yourself, I've done these before, quite a few times. These can be refactored. We're simply asking for a number. And that should remind you of inputting a distance, which could have been refactored as well. I don't know whether you did it or not when you did your distance converter, but those 3 lines of code repeatedly whenever you input a distance, or you input any of the values you've needed for the BMI calculator, such as your height and weight. So we're going to refactor these out. So I'm going to cut them out of here. I'm going to go to my ConsoleHelper. I'm in my ConsoleHelper. I'm going to put a new method in. It's going to be a public method. I'm going to return a double, although we could do something similar for ints if we wanted to. We'll need a prompt to the user which may change, and I'm going to put those 3 lines of code in there. So instead of this, we'll use that prompt, so it can be different each time. And then the rest should be okay, except it's not necessarily a choice number here, it is just a number. We don't know what kind of number it is. And having got it and converted it, we can return it. Oh, it has to be a static method again. Okay, so we now have a general purpose input number routine. So going back to here now, so what we'll do now is we'll use that. Okay, now the only problem is I made that a double, and this, in this case, we want an int. And there's a nice quick way of what's called casting. So whatever number is returned, we will change it into an int. Which means if it was a double and it had some decimal places, those decimal places will be lost. But we're not. We just want an integer, 1, 2 or 3. I'm sure you've all spotted my deliberate mistake here. We wanted a double here, not an int. So that should have been double, and this should be double. We want to be able to use this routine to either get a number as a double, or to get it as a double and cast it into an int. So I made that correction. Just check it builds. We can now use this console helper in our distance converter. So if we look at converting distances, instead of this input distance method which was in the distance converter, we can now use our console helper. We use the console helper input number. Okay, the next thing is if we want to change this, we can now remove input distance. Yes, look, you can see it's greyed out now. That can be removed from the distance converter because it's in the console helper now. The next thing that can be removed is this displaying and selection of choices here. Okay, so we're going to use our select choice from our console helper now. So what we need is a string array of choices. And the choices are the ones we've got here. That's one choice. These are string constants, so that will do us. So there are choices. So that gets our choice number. Now we want the actual choice, the unit itself. We don't need that complicated execute choice thing now. We can just do it relatively easily because the unit will be, if we have the choice number 1, 2 or 3, as it's an array, it has an index value. We can get it like that. So it's the unit is the choices, whatever choice number, 1, 2 or 3. Think about it. It's not quite right because array indexes start at 0, so we'll have to take 1 off. Okay, that should get us there. We now no longer need this display choices. That can go. We don't need this complicated execute choices either. That can go. So we've considerably simplified and shortened our... Oh, we haven't used the prompt, have we? Yes. Yes, missed one thing out. We haven't used the prompt. Thank you, Visual Studio, for reminding us. So before we select the choice, we do need to output the prompt. So the prompt is going to say, select the from distance unit. Then it'll list the units. Then it'll ask, please enter your choice. Select the to unit distance, and so on. That's what the prompt's going to say. I think it might need some adjustment. Let me just try it. I'm going to use the distance calculator now. It's displayed them. Select the from distance unit 1, 2, 3. What's your choice? 1. It's okay except I'd like blank lines. Some more a blank line after the prompt. I think I'd like these moved away from the left hand side as well. So that's just a minor thing. In the console helper, we'll just put an extra space there. I think we might have a blank line as well. Let's try a blank line there. That looks better. Yes, that looks better, except we want a blank line here as well. So in the distance converter, it's much better, yeah. Yeah, we could do with a blank line there, couldn't we? Otherwise, we're there. Let's build that. And of course, I'm forgetting to change, save these changes, aren't I? I've done too many of them now. We refactored. Using the ConsoleHelper. We are still left with two issues for which you'll lose marks. The first is that if the user makes a mistake and doesn't put in a 1 or a 2, but puts in a 3, they're told it's an invalid choice, but the program then terminates. And we don't want that. We want the user to have a second go at getting that right. The other issue is if the user, when asked for a number, puts in something which is definitely not a number, such as that. You might be expecting an error message with this one, but what you'll get instead is a system, well, typically called a crash. The system has crashed. Put it in technical terms, you have an exception which is unhandled, i.e. there was no code written to take care of that. So we need to solve these two issues. The second issue will occur for any number that the user tries to enter. So I'm putting it in the InputNumber method. So we're setting a boolean to be is valid, and what we're doing is asking for the value, getting the value, which is fine, it'll be a string, so it won't fail there. Where it fails is when we try to convert a value which isn't a number into a number from a string. So we'll use a try catch clause for that, and the catch is catching the exception, that is any exception. So we'll try to convert the number. If it fails, it'll come here, set is valid to false, and then it will write out it's an invalid number. If it does convert properly, is valid will be set to true, and then the loop will complete and return the number. So that's what we're going to put in place for InputNumber. Okay, so I've entered the code. Couple of minor changes. I've initialized these variables. That's not essential because we go into the loop straight away, write out the prompt, get a value back, and then we try and convert it. So let's see how it works in practice. There's our error message, invalid number, and we're asked to enter our choice again. It'll carry on doing that until we do put a valid number in. And then our choice, our SelectChoice tells us that's not a good choice, but again it doesn't ask us to re-enter. Okay, so we have an input number which will come back with a double number. It will definitely go around this loop until it gets a double number, but it can be any number, and there are occasions when we know what the range of numbers is. So in the case of when we've got choices 1 or 2 or 3, we want numbers 1, 2 or 3. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a second InputNumber method. This is referred to as polymorphism, different versions of the same method. They have to be different in terms of parameters, but they have to be the same in terms of public static double and the name InputNumber. So we're going to do a second public. We'll still need a prompt, but now we need a minimum and maximum value. Min and max are so widely accepted as abbreviations that I'm going to allow it in this case. Now we don't have to write all that code again, so this input number is going to use the other input number, but it will check whether the values are between min and max. So again we're going to use a boolean, and we'll have a double number. doesn't matter what you set those to, because I'm going to make sure that they're checked thoroughly. Again, we're going to use a do loop, and we're going to do that while we haven't got a valid number. So the not symbol and only when we've got a valid number are we going to return it. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is call the other input number, and we'll pass on the prompt. So that will get us a number back. It will be a number, but we don't know the size of the number. So the next thing we're going to do is check if it's within the valid range. So if the number is less than the minimum, or the number is greater than the maximum, we know it's not valid. So in which case we're going to set is valid to false, and we're going to write out a message, and the message will be must be between the minimum value and the maximum value. There's our message. But if it isn't that, we can set is valid to true. It is in the valid range and we're happy. Okay, I'm leaving you to do the comments, although I'm sparing you the need to define the parameters and return values. You can if you like. That would be a thorough documentation. I'm just allowing you to stick to a small summary instead. Okay, so we've now got a second input number method. So if we go back to our SelectChoice method here, here's where we're using input number, and the choices will always start at 1. So if we use the input number with a minimum and maximum, the minimum will always be 1. Let me fold this over. So the minimum is 1. The question is, what is the maximum? Well, it's depending on how many choices there are. Now, fortunately, arrays do have methods, and the arrays do have a length method. Or is it a property? No, it's a property. A length property, sorry. So I think in terms of lining up, probably makes more sense if I do that. Okay, so now it should now not be possible to put an invalid choice in. So if I say 3 when it should be 1 or 2, yes. Okay, my message perhaps could have blank lines and maybe a space before it, but otherwise we are happy now. Wherever we use select units, or wherever we use input number, in fact, we can now check that they are valid values. I'm not sure you need to use it in the BMI calculator, because what is the heaviest weight? What is the tallest person? I'm not sure. You could put maximums which are, impossible. Like, I don't think anyone's over 10 feet high. So you could check it that way if you wanted to. But I'm happy to stop there. Okay, so to summarize then, we have done a major refactoring there, which affects both APO1 and APO2 and improves them so that the user's input is checked that it is valid within a range if necessary, and it is a number if a number is required, and they get more than one chance to enter the values and get them right. So we do have methods which check that numbers entered by users are valid. And we also have a method where we can offer the user a range of choices and allow them to select one of those choices. So those refactoring is in our library class. If you haven't created the library class from scratch, you can now just download it and use it, and alter your Appo1 and Appo2 and Appo3. We'll need it in Appo3 as well, so that all those apps use the library class.